There you are, Big Jim. How you doing, my friend, tonight?
I'm awesome, pal. It's been a great day for me.
Absolutely. You had a successful outing at the gym.
Yeah.
Stretched it where you haven't stretched before, lifted what you haven't lifted before, and you felt like a
Well, what I
champ.
haven't done, what I haven't done in 18 months, and it was, I walked out of the gym today, and I was, 90% of the way back to being a human being. It felt great.
That's awesome. Well, we're glad to see you back. It's always fun to see you with a smile on your face. Most times you are, but this you can tell there's a certain glow about you, which we're happy for you.
Bobbing and weaving.
Attaboy. Listen, you know far more about this gentleman than I will ever know that we're going to be bringing on tonight. You've spent an awful lot of time with Bernie. You've seen him grow. You grew with him basically at the same time. He competed in a few Canadian events.
Oh yeah, well. He competed a lot. He won some up here too.
Yeah,
he's no slouch. I mean, even back then, he came up here and took some Canadian money back home for sure.
Well, I'll tell you, doing research on either one of you would take a good month. The accomplishments both of you have managed to achieve is remarkable. Bernie is someone that to say I know him, I know his name, but when I started to dive into some of his profiles and biographies and accomplishments, it was like, holy smokes, I can't write.
Well, Scotty, there's so many things too. If people have questions, like he's an absolute czar on vintage lures, like collecting and the knowledge of vintage lures. It's absolutely like he's world class at that. He can catch smallmouth with the best of them, largemouth with the best of them, as he's proved. He fishes a lot of salt water. He does it all, and he makes his living in the fishing industry. And I think that that's key. That's why I really like to have guys like Bernie on here. And of course, you don't get to fish BSS Elite by accident. It's because you know how to fish. Like you need to listen when these guys talk.
Yeah.
I might have won a bunch of tournaments in Canada, but it doesn't compare to the waters these guys fish, the competitive nature, the number of people. Like, we've talked before about tournaments. These guys go to a lake and, they're fishing it, and there's 100 of them fishing it, but there's also 3 other club tournaments on the same lake and stuff like that. The competitive factor from the other boats and things like that is just huge. Like it's almost like we live in Disneyland here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Steve Shaw's in the house. How you doing, Steve? Tony's with us. Chris Bain, how you doing, my friend? Well, as I said, guys, the gentleman that we're going to be speaking to is this jet right here, Bernie Schultz. If you don't know him, you're going to know him after today's show. I certainly have learned a lot about him in the last 4 hours of doing what research I could to learn a little bit more about him. To give you a quick overview, we're going to use one of many, and I mean many videos where he has basically told his history, how he evolved into the professional angler that he is. This is done by Bass, so have a listen.
I'm from Florida, born and raised, and I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, my uncles, and those people I grew up with, fishing the coast, fishing lakes, fishing rivers. Bass were just another species to pursue. They were the easiest species to pursue. Inside the mouth. Early lure development kind of.
So we can go back to that, Jim, about the lure development. I know it goes on and on about some of the antique lures that Bernie has, and I'm going to get him to explain all that. But without further ado, let's bring in our featured guest tonight, Bernie Schultz.
Greetings, guys.
What's going on, buddy?
Good. How's it going?
Good. What's the temperature down there?
It's been like in the mornings and evenings in the like upper 60s, low 70s, gets up to about 85 to 90 in the middle of the day. It's been beautiful, drier heat. So we like that. No humidity.
I just saw a picture Dave Chong posted from him practicing for the Franny Cup this morning. And he was scared to stand at the front of the boat. It was just white, the frost. It's the first frost that we've had this year. So, but next week, it looks like it all warms up, lows of 12 Celsius. So 50, 55 at night and 70 in the daytime. So We're not there yet, but we're getting close.
I feel sorry for you guys. I mean, we get chills down here. So it even snows in my part of the state maybe once every 3 or 4 years. It's brief. It doesn't stick to the ground. That's super rare. But we do see a change of season in North Florida compared to South Florida. It's way more tropical down there.
Funny,
So-
you don't have to be far for it to make a difference.
No, it happens quick. We actually have 3 growing zones in the state of Florida. It's so north to south. You get almost pure tropical, then subtropical, and then we have like a temperate in between, kind of like South Georgia. That's where I'm in North Florida, so it's more like South Georgia.
Cool.
Well, Bernie, it was an honor to go back and look at and read some of the profile highlights that you have. The fact that you grew up in Florida, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And you entertained yourself basically on the 2 rivers. The one was Lake Markham, and then, of course, the Waukegan and St. John's River. What was really cool about what I read in your bio was that not only did you enjoy time on the water and, of course, fishing, but you entertained yourself by drawing those journeys. So you would draw certain aspects of it, which, of course, led you to a long-standing career in media. And we'll get to that. Obviously, you grew up 14 years of age. You managed to find yourself on a commercial boat because your family had taken over a fish and poultry market in town. So you were on these commercial boats, fishing for a wide variety of fish, I would imagine. Tell us a little bit about that at a young age, being out on big water and seeing the work that's put in by our commercial anglers.
Yeah, it was smaller boats generally. These guys that supplied my dad's market weren't the true fish, go out to sea for weeks at a time or days at a time. They were day trips. They'd go out and catch what they could. And my dad liked fresh fish. This market was in Coconut Grove, which is a area of Miami on the bayfront in Key Biscayne. And he acquired that market. I was actually born and raised in Sanford, Florida. And then when I got to 9th grade, my dad was down in he moved to Miami ahead of us, got the market, got established, and we followed him probably within a few months. And I went to high school in my first year of college down there. And so I got exposure to saltwater, inshore saltwater, just kind of canal fishing really for bass as well. We lived on a canal in an area called Cutler Ridge, north of Homestead. And so I was exposed to a lot of different types of angling. The fish market thing for me was not a big slice of my life. It was probably 4 or 5 years. Once I got old enough, I came up to Gainesville to go to college, and I stayed. I haven't left Gainesville since.
Well, there you are. So now you grow up, you graduate from high school, and you're at the University of Florida. And this is pretty much where you embark on what will become a long-standing professional angling career as a bass angler. You met a certain somebody. His name, I believe, was Larry Wilson.
Yeah.
Where
you did your research.
Yeah. I did as much as I possibly could because there is a plethora of it in regards to you. It was the Bassmasters Gator Country Club that he took you to, and there was a club tournament where you drew, and this, I can't imagine this, but you drew Shaw Grisby's name.
True story. That was my first draw ever in a competition. I'd fished, in Miami and in Sanford when I was a kid growing up. And that was I probably should back up a little bit. When I was in Sanford as a kid, we lived outside of town a pretty good ways. We lived on Lake Markham and the Wekiva River, which you kind of botched that a little bit.
But I'm good at that. That's what I do.
Hey, I get your rivers and lakes mixed up too. So it's all Indian names are hard to get sometimes. But anyway, the Wekiva River is a feeder stream that ran near our home, and it dumped into the St. John's River. And that was my playground. And I didn't have any neighbors until probably when I was about, I think, 12 years of age. A group of boys moved in next door, and those became my pals for life. but that's what we did. There were no malls, there were no phones, there were no Xboxes back then. You made your own entertainment, and my source was going outdoors, and fishing was 90% of it.
Well, I can't imagine being any different than you and having that kind of system of waterways in my own backyard. I would have been a very busy person. I'm sure, Jim, you would have been the same. But I want to make sure I got this right. You are a 9-time Bassmaster Classic qualifier.
Right. Yeah.
9 times you qualified for that. Incredible. You managed to win over $1 million in career winnings, and I believe that's not over just yet. Bertie, you're still competing?
No, I'm not giving up yet. Everybody asks me, when are you going to quit? What are you going to do? And like, if I were to retire, I'd fish anyway, so I might as well stay out there. And I got my health. I feel better when I'm on the road competing than I do when I'm sitting home. So it's kind of a lifestyle thing as much as it is a profession. Back on Shaw Grigsby, that was the instructor that you mentioned at the University of Florida. His name was Larry Wilson. He suggested I join the Bass Club, the Bassmasters of Gator Country, which was a highly competitive club. We won 2 Bass National not championships, but state championships in the Bass Federation when I was in that club. And Shaw was an anchor to a lot of that, but there were other guys several that made All-Americans and Bassmaster Classics. There was a hotbed of really good fishermen right here in town, and I was privy to that. I learned a lot in a short period of time, and that kind of led me to the next level, which was the Redman Tournament Trail. A lot of your older listeners will relate to that. I'm sure Big Jim knows. And I had some success there really quick, and it was a boom period for fishing, and I was in a state that was targeted by a lot of companies because it was a 12-month fishery, and I also did saltwater, so I had a lot of appeal to companies in the fishing industry, and I picked up some sponsors inadvertently. Really, it wasn't my goal. I was an illustrator. That's what I was studying in school, and so I just kind of backed into this profession of fishing.
Wow. Well, I'm going to let Jim take it over from here, but included in those winnings was, of course, one in 1990, which included the Canadian Open champion, where you managed to take home $50,000. Good for you. And then in 1993, you backed that up with the Canadian Cup championship. Right. You've had a lot of success on Canadian waters. Jim, I'll let you take it from there because you guys are going to walk me through the history of Canadian bass fishing in the Canadian Open.
Sure. Hey, Bernie, how old were you when you knew that this is what you were going to do? Like you took the plunge?
Yeah. When I graduated college, I was competing regionally, and I still in the club, still participating in those events, but I wanted to test the waters, against other competition around the state. Probably, well, it was 1997, I believe. 1987. I was competing in a tournament on the St. Johns River, and back then Forrest and Nina Wood were running Ranger boats. And I went over to greet her after weigh-in, and she said, "I want you to know I've put all your entry fees in for next year. We want you to represent Ranger boats on the Bass Tour." And that's when I knew. In 90, let's see when it was, 80, I got to think about this. Somewhere in that window, I had some success on the Redman Tournament Trail. I won the points in the state and also won the Gator division at All-American. And I picked up Woodstream Corporation, which they were the owners of Fenwick, the brand Fenwick. And I was also sponsored by Shimano that same year. That's when I first entered the relationship with Shimano, and they've been my rod and reel sponsor my entire career. Couldn't imagine representing anybody else. I've worked with Shimano Japan directly, made a lot of trips over there, did a lot of filming around the world with Shimano. Just they're a solid group, solid company. They make great product.
Yeah, I'll give you a second on that, buddy. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, they were instrumental. They were, because of them that I was able to Ranger, Shimano, Woodstream. That was the early support that I had, and that's what launched me into competitive fishing as a career.
It's funny. I got launched into it up here because the job that I had disappeared, and I had caught a couple of fish. In 1987, I won the first classic that they had here for GM or for OB, I guess it was at Big Reno.
Yeah.
1987, and then the job disappeared, and well, I may as well be a professional fisherman. And people said, "All right, what do you mean a professional fisherman?" I don't know how it would ever work, but
oh man,
it's completely different in Canada from the U.S. Hey, and that's the thing, Bernie. What's the difference that you see between tournaments because you fished in Canada and tournaments in the U.S.? What would you can you sort of like parallel them and like are they really that different or?
Well, back in the day, in the early '90s, you guys were a little behind us in development. I would say competitive bass fishing in Canada was in its infancy. You had Bob Azumi, Rocky Crawford, Dan Crawford, Tom Brook was even competing. Yourself, of course, and you'd have to help me. There's a bunch of guys. Lynn Johnston.
The Johnson brothers' father. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Colin Stass.
So it was hard back then. Yeah, it was hard back then for Canadians to, turn it into a career. In the States, we were getting pretty well established. And, being in the southern states, your fishing was, you could compete more of the year. So, the tournament season could stretch to 9 or 10 months, really, year round if they wanted to. But, primarily it was a 9-month season. And so there was a lot of marketing strategy based around that. They targeted that part of the country, and bass fishing was growing like crazy back then. And you guys caught up eventually. I mean, I'd say they're parallel now. I don't think, you're behind us. The Johnstons are proven they can compete. There's other people from Canada that are very talented. Gussie, probably a bunch I'm unfamiliar with that just haven't gotten to the launch pad yet, but I'm sure they'll take off when they do. The skill set back then, you were a little bit behind, but nowadays, there's guys on the cutting edge, from Canada. So a lot of respect for the Canadian skill set. The anglers that come out of Canada now are very well versed. They're versatile. They can fish deep, shallow, cold climate, hot summer months. You're well versed and well represented these days.
Yeah, because we used to fish from opening weekend in June till long weekend in September. And after the long weekend in September, if you said you were going bass fishing, people look at you. Are you nuts?
Yeah.
Now they have tournaments in friggin' like they try to have tournaments right till there's ice. I mean, I've seen tournaments where they've launched in the morning and had to go to a different ramp to get their boat out because the ramp froze up. They're out there fishing. It's like 25 degrees. They're freezing to death, but it's a tournament and there's bass. We got to go,
Yeah.
They just get absolutely carried away with it. No, there's no doubt about that. Yeah. It's very, very true. I often thought because where we really saw it was there was so many things up here that people didn't know. They had no idea. They saw us at first, and we used to, we'd be flipping a jig to undercut banks using a musky rod because we didn't know about flipping rods yet. We had discovered that the fish were underneath these things, and you needed something really powerful to get them out. So we used to. I remember having my Skyline graphite musky rod. It was 5'9", and boy, I'll tell you, with some Dacron on there, when you set the hook and started reefing on that things with a musky rod. But now they got flipping rods, punching rods that are way stronger than the musky rods we had back then.
Yeah.
It's
Skyline was the first graphite rod.
Yep.
And then a bunch of people followed. Fenwick got involved, and Shimano caught up quickly, and there was a bunch of rod makers back then that saw the light, and glass kind of got displaced by graphite. But yeah, we're dinosaurs, brother.
What's that?
We're dinosaurs. We've seen too much in our time.
That's okay. I'll be a I'll be a Tyrannosaurus Rex. You can be a raptor.
That's good.
Well, one of the things that on that offshoot there, Bernie, I'd like to bring in this video again, and basically it talks about the evolution of baits, where we have come from in terms of the fact that they were primarily made out of wood and metal to where they are now. So I'm going to just share that screen, and we're going to have a listen for a second or two.
Born out of necessity, really. I mean, people were trying to catch fish. There was sport fishing for the elite, but most people were trying to catch fish for table fare. You know, and couldn't always get bait, so artificial lures kind of came along, born out of a need. And most of the early lures were fashioned after you know, fish or birds or insects, you know, living creatures that bass would naturally feed on. Yeah, I'm big into antique tackle. I like the history of our sport, the lore of our sport, the development that occurred in our culture related to fishing. The true lure as we know it today, that occurred probably late 1800s into the early 1900s. And the first materials were wood and there was a little bit of rubber. Rubber was just being developed and it was incorporated in some designs. I have some artificial frogs that were made in 1895 that were molded from rubber, but most of the materials back then were metal or wood. The stuff on this shelf, actually from here down, these are all Florida-made lures for the most part. There's a couple that are exceptions, but I collect Florida-made tackle for a couple of reasons. I was born and raised in Florida, but Florida was a hotbed for lure development. It was a place where they could test lures in the wintertime. A lot of the northern manufacturers like Head, Creek Chub, and Shakespeare, they actually did a lot of lure development in Florida in the wintertime. So it's got a deep history in that, and I find that interesting. I mean, to me, they're the tools of my trade, so it's just something I feel kind of obligated to know more about, being from the state, being the fact that there's such a history, a rich history.
Well, and you've got quite the collection, I must say. You know, some of those baits, those go-to baits back in the day, what were some of your most favorite baits to pitch back then?
Well, okay. You're talking about my collection. That goes back to pre-1900, and I wasn't around then, so I can't really.
So you can't. Those. Obviously, I can't. Nobody can speak to those. But
we're not that old.
Isn't that old?
Yeah.
But some of back in the day, what were some of your favorite baits to pitch?
Snagless Sally comes to mind. Hildebrandt Snagless Sally. That bait still works as good today as it did back in the 60s and 50s, even. I've had a long relationship with Hildebrandt, and it's kind of flattering to know that I'm part of their history. That company's actually been around since 1899. They started, the Hildebrandt family started that in Logansport, Indiana. It's now owned by Yakima Bait Company in Washington, and it's part of a bigger, you know, it's like under a group of different brands now by Yakima Bait Company. But I don't know. Worms were a big deal when I was a kid. We had a much narrower selection. You had Man's jelly worms, and you had cream worms. Nick Cream, it's spelled CREME. There was Hog Hunter worms. You know, soft plastics were pretty well established, but we just didn't have that many competitor brands yet. Lures, Rapala was around. You know, jitterbugs, hula poppers. There were crankbaits, not like we're familiar with today, but you know, there were diving and lipless crankbaits, and they're pretty common. You know, had bayou boogies and other kind of weird crankbaits. But yeah, I mean, lure development's been going on in this country since before the 1900s. And you know what's neat is New York and Ontario, especially along the St. Lawrence Seaway, I'm trying to say, and around the Thousand Islands, is very rich in lure development. There was a lot of metal lures developed there. The Chapman baits were developed there. The man baits were in that area. A lot of spinners and metal type lures. And then there were some, you know, wood baits came along. not long after. And that's the cool thing about wooden lures, is that's a product of our culture. Those didn't come from abroad. Like metal lures came from Europe, and Asia had metal lures and jigs and whatnot. The wooden lure, as you know it today, was actually pioneered in North America, primarily in the United States, and that's something to be proud of. And I like the history of that. I like the lore of lure development.
So I normally ask the guest that Jim brings on here this one question, and it's unanimous. Usually 9.5 times out of 10, it's electronics that's the answer. But in terms of technological advances, and obviously baits and bait manufacturers have certainly upped their game and are producing some incredible stuff. What is the one technological advancement that is not really spoken about? It's kind of an unsung hero, because you can talk about boat manufacturers, you can talk about outboard motors, the electronics that go along with your boat. What's one advancement that you can truly sort of hone in on and say, you know what, we don't talk much about that, but boy, does that ever make a big difference?
Oh man, that's tough. I mean, there's not a lot of new ideas in fishing. The more I collect tackle, the more I realize that the first anti-backlash reel was introduced in the early 1900s, before 1910. It was called the anti-backlash reel.
Wow.
It wasn't effective, but they were trying, and they've been trying for decades since. And now we got reels that have computers that slow the spool down, Shimano's DC series. So, in that regard, God, that's tough. I mean, everything across the board has been enhanced and improved. But as far as having the initial concept, that goes way back before any of us. Clothing, I mean, the way we dress, sun gloves and buffs, and, everything's about protection now. That wasn't even a thought back when we were kids or the generations before us. I'm sure a lot of anglers died from exposure, from melanomas or whatnot because of that. They didn't know about sunscreen and UV protection and whatnot. But as far as the technical aspects, man, I have to lean on that there's just not really any new concepts. The ideas get better all the time, but the concepts were there 100 years ago and more.
Well, I'll tell you, Jim, I don't know about you, but that to me was one of the best answers I've heard. Because
it wasn't just electronics.
Yeah, that seems to be the one that everybody picks is electronics, boats, and motors. Those things. But some have come on here, talked about lines. Jim, you talked.
I always say, electronics is number one. Braided line is second to me, and the Senko is third, because anybody can catch a fish if they chuck a Senko.
Yep.
It works. It's what it is. Probably the worst thing that ever happened to fish was the Senko.
Yeah. You know what's cool is the evolution of the trolling motor. Back in the day, guys sculled, and that basically they used oars first, and then they learned to scull, which is a guy with a paddle, a short paddle, and he braced it against his forearm, and the paddle, would extend from his wrist, and he would do this side to side kind of motion and propel the boat forward, while the other guy in the boat really got the advantage of having free mobility to cast wherever he wanted to. Then they started realizing they could make contraptions to propel the boat. I recently acquired this. It's cool as heck. Big Jim, you'll love this. It's like a rudder with an extended arm, and you actually wag it back and forth, and it'll propel the boat forward, and it actually puts out a pretty good propulsion. You can move a small John boat or a stump knocker wooden boat at a pretty good clip. You could troll with that mechanism. It was made in Florida, but there were others. And in fact, the Boat Museum in Clayton, New York, is full of early mechanisms to propel boats. And then we evolved through all the different trolling motors, and now I'm testing a trolling motor for PowerPole, who's my title sponsor, that to me it will eclipse anything that's out there. I've had this thing on my boat for about 6 months now, and it's bulletproof. It's on my saltwater skiff. They won't let me run it on the tour yet, but it is an incredible machine. It's impervious to corrosion and salt water, and it's got so much thrust, and it's so easy to operate, and it's so durable. I can't wait for this thing to hit the market. So things do develop.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, it's people like yourself. Like, we talked last week about a lot of the stuff with Shimano, like having stuff out there for you guys to use well in advance and come along with it and say, no, this doesn't work. You need to fix this, put something here, do that, whatever. And, that's how these things get developed. That's why I know with Scotty, I always joke, I see people say, oh, they should send me some of those and I'll test them for you. And I say, well, no, the company already got them tested by people that know way more about fishing than you'll ever dream to know before they brought it to market.
That's a big part of our job. It's a big part of our job description. Yep. You and I have done product development since we've been in the sport, and Shimano and a whole bunch of different companies. If they're smart, they listen to their anglers. There's been a lot of companies that thought that their designers were smarter than the guys using their baits, and they failed or they struggle. And the companies that take the input and put it to good use, those are the companies that flourish.
Now, Jim,
go ahead, Scotty.
Being from the deep south, I'm dying to ask you, because the one thing that we hold very near and dear to our heart up here is not just walleye. Just kidding. Is smallmouth bass. What was it like for you to catch your first smallmouth bass?
That's a great question. It wasn't my objective when I got on the bass tour early in my career, right after Nina Wood says, I'm paying your entry fees, you're on the tour. My next season, the tour started, and back then we fished from fall to spring and had the classic in the summer on the Bassmaster Trail. It's not like that anymore. We start in the spring and we fish through the summer, and then they have the classic the next year, which is weird to me. I kind of think the classic ought to be in the same year that you qualify. But anyway, back then we started in the fall, and our first event was on the St. Lawrence River out of Clayton, New York. And I went up with a buddy of mine who's he runs a tackle shop here in town. He's actually a fellow lure collector. His name's Gary Simpson. He and I went up there together, and we practiced together. He went as a non-boater. We drug my boat up there, and it was eye-opening. I actually caught a 5-pound smallmouth, and that was a long time ago, in the late 80s. There weren't many 5-pound smallmouth back then, and they're commonplace now on the river because of gobies and the mussels and all that. But I was captivated, and for me, it just turned into an annual pilgrimage to go up there, whether I was fishing a tournament or not. I was always on the St. Lawrence in the summer, and I got to be friends with guys like Jim and Dan Crawford, and I actually fished the OV Pro Bass Tour one year with Dan and qualified for their championship. And it's just a learning experience. I fished a lot of the lakes in Ontario, and most of it was on the St. Lawrence, but Rideau Ferry, I won a tournament there and really enjoyed that. That was a largemouth event, but whenever there was an option for smallmouth, I was focused on smallmouth.
Yeah,
that's really cool. I remember that year when you came up and you fished the classic, and they had it over by Ottawa there.
They did.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me about you couldn't believe how many fish were in the Ottawa River. You just didn't get on the big ones fast enough because you'd never been there. But the number of fish that you caught Carolina rigging just outside the weed beds, that stuck in my mind forever. And it was funny. It was something I went back and I did right after and just clobbered them, getting a Canadian to throw a Carolina rig is like, it doesn't happen. Like, they won't do it. Now they all do for smallmouths in the St. Lawrence.
Sure.
Yeah, like if you're not chucking a Carolina rig, it's one of those things, and they still don't talk about it.
Yeah,
you keep it very, very quiet. Like, they'll let a drop shot, oh yeah, use a drop shot. Yeah, well, how come the rod's sitting in the same place in the boat as it was when you left? But all 3 Carolina rigs are tore up and got bait, chewed up, hanging on them.
Right.
It's one of those things. That it works when you're out there doing it. So, for the people watching, if you're fishing smallmouths at this time of the year right now, Bernie, what are you going to be doing?
Well, I like shallow. I like to try and find them 10 feet or less if I can. I'm not afraid to go offshore and fish vertically and look for those big schools, but there's just something. Maybe it's my upbringing. Being in Florida, it's always been a shallow approach, fresh and salt. When I go on the flats in the Gulf, I'm fishing in water. If the boat broke down, you could walk home. It's that shallow. So I just have a tendency to look shallow when I can, and there's enough big fish shallow there. You're probably not going to catch as many fish most of the time. There are times when you catch more than the guy fishing deep, but I just like that style of fishing. I like the versatility that it offers. You can fish a whole spectrum of lures and techniques that you're kind of limited in what you can do really deep. So that's one appeal to me. But I would say I'd start shallow, and I'd start with top waters and moving baits. And when I find fish, I'll mark those spots. If it's a tournament, I'm not going to lean on them, and I'll come back on tournament day and I'll probably detail the area with a bunch of different presentations, a bunch of different lures. But I like my little drum roller swim bait. It's made by Hildebrandt. It was designed for redfish, which are in the drum family, and that's where you get drum roller from. But that little bait has caught me so many smallmouth. It's a killer swim bait. It comes with a Minnow Z trailer, so it's very durable. And smallmouth, I make them run it down. I don't slow. Sometimes I'll fish it slow in deeper water, and sometimes slow on sand or across shoals. But generally, I'm making the fish chase that bait, and I like to excite the fish, whether it's jerk baits, spinner baits, and swim baits. I like to make them come up for the lure and travel for the lure. I think you get a better commitment from the fish when they have to chase it down.
Now, you developed a spinner bait too, didn't you, with Hildebrandt?
Yeah, a couple of them. Yeah, the Blade, which was a grass bait for Hildebrandt, and also the tin roller.
That's the one I was thinking, the tin roller. Yeah.
Still use them today. There's a lot of call for them. They're hard to get, but Hildebrandt still makes them, and they can go onto Yakima's website to the Hildebrandt page, and you can actually order direct from Yakima and Hildebrandt. I
know I have a buddy of mine. I don't know whether you remember Sandy Grant.
I remember the name, sure.
Yeah, you fished with him in the Canadian Open once.
Yep.
And you brought him over by in behind Carlton Island, all down throughout out in there, and he was so excited because I was in the hotel room next to him when he came back, and I think you caught most of the fish on a spinner bait, and he had never really used the spinner bait, and I couldn't believe that back then because you got to remember back then that's when Canada was in the phase where you brought a booth to the Sportsman Show. You had 3 spinnerbait racks, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like $5 to $10, whatever for spinnerbaits. Guys would buy them but just like, guys had that bags of them. They'd be lugging it over their shoulder. They'd buy like 100 spinnerbaits at the show.
Yeah, the whole key was back then and today was keeping the bait up high and tracking just beneath the surface. And I don't care if I was fishing 12 foot of water. They'd come up like brown missiles and destroy that thing. And a lot of times the bait would barely hit the water and you get the bite. And it seemed like most of the time when that bite was on, that's what happened. As soon as it touched down, they were on it. In the case of that Canadian Open, Wayne Azumi beat me by 2 ounces in that event. The one that I caught him on a spinnerbait behind Carlton Island. Yep. Yeah. That was the.
I know that was something that Rocky and I discovered in the lakes up here was that you'd go to a hump or a shoal and you'd catch some smallmouth, and then you'd go 5 times and you wouldn't get them. And there was a few times we were looking, and all of a sudden, like 150 feet behind you, you'd see them busting on the top. And that was the first experience we ever had with open water smallmouths.
Yeah.
And here you are now, 35, 40 years later. They've got sonar now that allows you to track these fish down in open water, see them, know where they are, and catch them. And it's we couldn't even buy a spin, like we had to use a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait. That's all that they had. We used to take rubber core sinkers, cut the rubber out, and clamp it on the wire.
We did that.
Yes. Reel it faster and keep it in the water because you couldn't reel it fast enough.
Yep.
Like when they hit that thing, they'd just about take the rod out of your hands. It was just absolutely, and it's still like that today.
Oh yeah, yeah, and we added weight to our jerk baits so you could cast them further and get them down quicker and work them faster. And smallmouth, the whole thing back then, and it still works that way today. Sometimes it seems like it's becoming more of a finesse game for smallmouth these days to be consistent. But back in the day, they were excitable fish. You had to excite them and provoke them into chasing your lure and committing to it. And I really like that. That to me had a strong appeal. I like to burn a spinnerbait just beneath the surface, or work a topwater quick and kind of get them going, or a jerk bait. I was pretty aggressive with a jerk bait. Seemed like if you paused it, you get fewer bites. Nowadays they like it paused. So I don't know what happened, but they're tougher to fool, but they're bigger fish. And
Yeah, I think it's all pressure.
Could be.
Because I don't, Scotty always hears me say, I don't ever want to even begin to consider that the fish are getting smarter.
Yeah, that could be it. Absolutely. It's funny, Jim, back in the day, 3-pound average was really strong in any of those tournaments on the St. Lawrence and any of the Great Lakes, really. Nowadays, if you don't have a 4-pound average, you might as well just get off the stage.
It's true. Yeah.
You come up on a stage and Mercer says to you, nothing to see here, keep moving.
Yeah, next.
Shoot you across the stage.
Yeah. Now, like our MCs and all of our public figures, speaking about largemouth bass, Bernie, Steve Shaw, and thanks guys for bringing in some questions here for Bernie. Is there a main behavioral difference between U.S. largemouth and Canadian largemouth that you can share with us?
Yeah, man, that's a tough question. It's a great question, but it's really tough answer to get to. There's subspecies. We have a Florida strain largemouth, and then we have a northern strain largemouth, and we have hybrids that are mixed of the two. Florida strain largemouth are very lethargic in the summer and winter, and they're in cold front situations, they can be impossible to provoke to feed or bite. Seems to me that the northern strain, which I'm including the Canadian largemouth in that group, are hardier in cold weather. They're more reliable in cold weather. They bite better, I think. Florida fish, a lot of times it's a waiting game. The term dead sticking or dead worming, that started in Florida because Florida bass were so slow to react. Sometimes you'd had to literally throw your bait out there and let it rot until one would finally walk off with it. I mean, that's an exaggeration, obviously, but it kind of felt that way. It'd be up to 30 or 40 seconds before you could get some kind of reaction with your bait just sitting still on the bottom. And that was true for topwater in a lot of cases. The slower you fish for topwater, the better your chances for success. But the northern strain largemouth, I think, are more responsive throughout the season. Maybe it's because they have a shorter season. The farther north you go, they know they got to feed when they get the opportunity. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm answering his question, but yeah, I think it can change dramatically from region to region, even lake to lake.
No, I think you did a fantastic job answering that. So you've talked about topwater, you've talked about spinner baits, wacky rigging, drop shotting. Have you used the Tokyo rig? Is that part of your arsenal?
A little bit. No, I didn't really take to that. I mean, guys are using it and they like it. Rapala brought that on and I played with it for a while, but it didn't really stick for me. And I may be making a mistake. And I'm usually a good student. I like new techniques and I like to learn things. And you got to be extremely versatile. As Big Jim knows, if you're not learning the newest techniques and learning how to work the newest lures that have unique actions, you're going to get left in the dust. These guys are very smart about, very cerebral in their approach. They spend a lot of time on the water, swimming pools. They'll test baits when they can't have, they don't have the opportunity to go to the lake. They're testing their baits in the pools and perfecting things. And you have to really stay on your game. And so I try to do that, but the Tokyo rig never really stuck for me.
I'll tell you, we've talked about this before on here, Bernie. That's why I laughed when he brought up the Tokyo rig. We always make fun of Scotty on that. But when we had Jimmy Lindner on, and the question of that rig came up, and Jimmy told a story where they were with the guys from VMC, and they were sitting around a table discussing new stuff.
Yeah.
And they had a plan for a whole day, in the room with the blackboards and everything, like at Shimano they did, and all that stuff and everything. And they're there, and they said when they passed out the Tokyo rig, they handed one to Al. Well, they handed them to everybody. And Al looks at it and goes, that's just another bottom deal, throws it on the table like just a bait walker or something,
right.
Nothing, whatever. And so it went on. So Al was like totally like, they were wondering. And Jimmy says to me, they come to the lunch break and they're all out having lunch. And he says, I wonder, he says, where the heck did Al go? So he goes in to look for him and he's going around the table, picking all the rigs off everybody's spot.
Taking them home.
He knew what that was. And their biggest thing on that rig, their biggest take on that was that when it sits on the bottom, if there's silt, it keeps the bait up out of the silt.
That's right.
You see the bait all the time. And if you think about that, man, it doesn't even have to be silty. I know guys that are dragging them instead of a Carolina rig on the St. Lawrence.
Yeah.
And they want to change weight. The pliers, boom, they just twist, put another sinker on, take one off, whatever, back in the water. It's definitely something that I caught a lot of fish out the back here. Hey, I'm gonna put you on the hook here. I've been experiencing a huge doldrum out the back, and I don't know what it is, because all my memories from Facebook show me hawking them out at an alarming rate at this time last year. And I'm down there. I'm lucky if I get one. And I think I caught 3 fish in 5 days, and I've been getting 5, 6, 7 a night. And if I weighed the 5 biggest one night, it would have probably been 17 pounds. And I mean, that's sitting in the lawn chair. You know what I mean? It's something. It's a movement. It's a bona fide seasonal movement that happens. So for the next week, Bernie Schultz, what should Big Jim be doing behind the house?
And this is for bass or walleye? I didn't catch
this is for largemouth. 3 to 5 feet deep, a little bit of cover left. You know when you get the weed beds when the crap disappears off the top, then the weeds rejuvenate, they get green on the top because they get sun again.
Yeah.
I got a bit of that going on, and we're probably 400 yards from water over 12 feet deep and about 600 yards from any form of current.
I got to think top water. I don't know how cold the water is yet, but if the water's still reasonably warm, you can have cool nights and still have pretty stable warm water, and top water bite just lights up. That's something I would consider. If they're in weeds, you want to try and pull them out of those weeds, maybe a swim bait zipping over their heads. I don't know. If they don't react to that, I'd probably go in and pitch at them.
That's really cool. You should mention that. See if I can find a picture here quick. Come out wherever you are.
You're talking about the Tokyo rig. That's become a flipping tool in Florida and in California. They use it in the toolies over there, and here it's reeds or buggy whips. But that made me think of that. It's kind of neat.
The one decent fish that I've got, look what it came on.
Is that a jitter? I was going to say it looks like a jitterbug.
Yeah,
How about that?
I was trying one of Hero Nishine's Abinos, that new lure that he won for best hard bait at ICAST for, because he lives in Canada now, and he's just a great guy, and he sent me over a bunch of that stuff, and I went down there and I thought, well, man, if I was fishing on the Big Rito or something, I'd have the old Zara spook type bait out, a walk the dog bait. I'd have my Jackal bow stick going out there. And I tell you, boy, they'd just be blowing it off the top because there's nothing beats in the fall. There's quick mornings, you're working the top water, and it's just walking across, and they just blow up on it.
Yeah.
It's just, we've got, you can weigh, in the Big Reno now, you can weigh for 5 fish, you can weigh 22, 23 pounds of smallmouth now.
Wow, that's good. When I was there, I didn't target smallmouth at all. It was purely a largemouth bite, but I didn't have a lot of time to learn the lake. I had a couple of days. If you recall, we left straight from the Canadian Open and went there. Mm-hmm. I think we had like maybe 5 days between the two or something. I can't remember. And I stayed in. It's hard to remember exactly what the window was, but I had my family with me, and I think I sent them home, and I went on up to Rito Ferry and had 2 days to practice. And I found the fish I kind of narrowed the options. I went into where the water was entering the chain and where the water left the chain. I figured one of those had to produce, and sure enough, one did. And I was able to put together a really good stringer for a couple of days, but never really considered smallmouth when I was there.
Yeah, and it wasn't an option either, especially back then, because I mean they're the true open water fish.
Right.
You know, you'll get the odd one along the edges of the milfoil, you know, if there's some hard bottom there or something like that, and you know, once you catch a smallmouth there, you gotta go and look to see what you caught it off, because especially now with the GPS, you can mark it, and inevitably with how clear the water is there now, you'll see there'll be all silt with milfoil. You'll come along and there'll be 3 or 4 boulders and a bunch of stones the size of your fist or something.
Right.
And you can see it now, where you remember when you fished up in that backwater, how murky it was.
Yeah, it had color.
Yeah. In the summertime there now, it still gets a bit of murky to it, like not a lot, but a bit. But over in the deep spot there, it's crystal clear. Like you can see your crankbait coming back at 12, 14 feet of water.
Yeah.
Of some of the new baits that have come out, are you fond of, like, say, the spy baits? Do you use those, Bernie?
You know, I try to. I've caught fish on them. I don't want to say I don't care for them, but there's a risk factor when you use those baits. The smallmouth have a good chance of throwing that bait. I don't know. I think they're very effective. It's really kind of ironic to me, being a lure collector. The first minnows were underwater minnows. They were basically spy baits. They look like topwater baits, but they were designed to sink. They put a lot of weight in them. Even though they were wood, they were designed to sink, and they had props fore and aft. They had tandem prop baits, and they trolled them and cast them. And basically they were spy baits. And just kind of curious to me how that's, 120 years later, we're back to, submersible minnow-shaped lures with tandem spinners on them. But yeah, they're very effective, and I have caught fish with them. They're not a primary tool for me. I always have one tied on in the Great Lakes, but I don't rely on them. Not like some guys. Some guys that's like a bread and butter lure for them.
Now, one thing that we haven't spoken about, which is a huge part of your career as well, is, of course, in media. Some of the publications that you have wrote for, some publications that you've offered incredible photography for as well. Obviously, this started at a very young age because you would actually draw pictures of some of your journeys out in Florida. Tell us a little bit about the evolution of the print media, and now, of course, it's gone to electronic. Someone like yourself that has spent so much time in paper media, do you see yourself going the way of the dodo bird when it comes to the electronic, or can you guys still keep up?
I don't anymore, and that was really kind of my exit from illustration. I was an illustrator for Bass for a lot of years, and there were other guys. We were freelance illustrators. I don't think there were really any staff illustrators. All the work was sourced from freelance artists, but computers came of age, and then they decided that was the way to go. They, I remember Dave Precht, who was the editor of Bassmaster Magazine at the time, asked me to do a number of different aerial views, and that he wanted to use those to scan for computer use. And I said, well, if I do that, then I'm basically drawing myself out of a job. He said, well, you're going to be gone anyway, so you might as well do it and collect the check. And he was right. I mean, there's still room for freelance illustrators. Bass still employs some guys from time to time. They buy their work. But so much is computerized now, and I was not trained in computer graphics and never really had the desire to be a computer graphic artist. I probably would have learned it had not fishing got in the way. Fishing, I was never in school to become a professional angler. I was there to become an illustrator, and I minored in advertising. My intent was to go to work at an ad agency somewhere and be an illustrator. And I happened to get a few breaks and won some tournaments early. So that kind of got shelved, and I became a professional angler. I never intended to be making a living as a fisherman on tour, I can tell you that. But I'm glad it worked out. I'll say that.
And now we got him.
Look at there. I made the cover.
Look at that good looking guy.
Finally.
Finally.
After 20
hilarious.
years,
It's a windy day in Lake Ontario.
Yeah, that looks awesome. Thank you.
Well,
Send
Bernie,
me one of those for my mom. She's going to have that.
Bernie, I thought Jim was leaving the room because, of course, I was going to ask the question. You had brought it up sort of in the preliminary talk that you and Jim were having in regards to there are 3 elite leagues down in the States. You've got Bassmasters, you got MLF, and of course you have the FLW series.
Right.
There is a lot of stigma. I'm sure there's a lot of negativity, positivity that goes along with those 3 leagues. Tell us a little bit about your take. Is it spreading the talent too thin, or is it giving anglers an opportunity that they wouldn't normally have to compete in these leagues?
I think it's doing exactly what it did when the FLW Tour was first announced. There was a big exodus back then. A lot of people don't remember that, but when the FLW Tour came into its own, a lot of guys left the Bass Tour. Jay Ellis, Mark Davis, Tommy Martin, Larry Nixon. I got to put this in chronology here. When the Elite Series was announced, and they didn't like the way that was patterned, higher entry fees and a lot more at stake. The cost of doing business for the angler was super, it was jacked up in overnight. And a lot of those guys left. They went to the FLW Tour, Larry and Tommy and a bunch of guys, Roland, Jimmy Houston. Just a lot of guys left and went to FLW. But I think the thing nowadays that, I think the talent's evening out. A lot of guys that left for the MLF Tour are coming back. And more would like to come back. Things were promised and not necessarily delivered on. Everybody was supposed to have unlimited exposure over there on their circuit, and a lot of guys have disappeared on that circuit. The reality is you got to perform to get the exposure. And a lot of guys left thinking, even if I just kind of, tread water, I'm still going to get a ton of exposure and I'll be fine. Well, that's not been the case. And I think some guys are leaving because of that. I wish everybody that went over there all the success in the world, but my best chances were with Bass. I served as an illustrator, and I'm now a columnist for Bass. So my roots were with Bass. I fished FLW early in my career. I did both tours. I did Bass and FLW. I made 5 FLW championships early in my career. And back then it was more manageable, but then they started competing with each other. So it became harder and harder to do both. John Cox still does it, but it's almost impossible. You got to be a gypsy to get it done, and you're going to miss an event or two to achieve that. But I don't know. One forum suits, one platform, I guess is the way to put it, suits a certain group of professional anglers, and the other suits the rest. Having 3 options is good. I don't know that the guys on the FLW Tour are able to garner the sponsorships that you get with MLF or with Bass, the Elite Series, but at least it gives them a place to compete. And I may end up there someday. Who knows? I don't want to speak poorly of any of them. I'm glad that there's all these options for the anglers and that guys are finding a way. But I think that it's evening out. To answer your question, I think, the talent's beginning to spread out and find a level across all 3 platforms.
Because I was amazed. I was looking at some of the comparisons. FLW Tour, the average years of experience per angler was 7.1, 7.6 for Bass, and 13.4 for MLF. But this was the staggering difference in terms of the comparison. The average number of events per angler. With FLW, it's 43. With Bass, it's 65. But this just blew me away. For MLF, The average number of events per angler is 136. Holy smokes. And when it comes to payout, obviously the average career earnings per angler, FLW is at 241,000, 439,000 for bass, and a staggering almost 1.3 million for each angler in MLF. Now, those numbers aside, from a conservationalist side of things, and you are a true conservationalist yourself, does the traditional weigh-in scale survive in these day and age going forward, or does the format that MLF, they personify the catch and release right there, right then with marshals and what have you? Do you see that catching on more in the future?
I hope so. The problem with it, it's absolutely the best way. There's no doubt. I'm not going to argue that point. I think that's the best concept they got at Major League Fishing, is catching the fish and getting it back in the water as quickly as possible. And there's penalties for not treating the fish correctly, letting them land on the carpet. I love all that. The problem is it makes it difficult from a spectator standpoint. People like to see fish cross the stage. They want to see anglers cross the stage. You don't have that with MLF, and it's sorely missed. And I think that's probably the reason bass has enjoyed continued growth. There was a scary period there when so much talent left. They weren't sure what the future would be for bass, but then they quickly realized their stage is still important in the eyes of the fans and the consumers, and so they still, hang their hat on that. We do have one tournament a year in Texas on Lake Fork. Every year we go out there and we catch the fish, weigh them, and release them immediately. The only fish we're allowed to keep in is one trophy size fish, and that fish is well cared for. We get it to the stage and share it with the people in the audience, and then it's gone. It's back in the lake swimming free. So I like the catch and release concept. I'd like to see it utilized more on the bass tour, but time will tell. Time will tell. As long as people want to show up at weigh-ins, and we draw big crowds, as you well know, when we were at Waddington or any of the northern events, the people show up, and they do so in the South. So there's definitely an appetite for anglers crossing the stage and weighing fish.
Right on. Jim, I'll let you.
Oh, go ahead, Scotty.
No, you go ahead, dude. I was just going to say, let you ask a question.
Okay. If you had to pick right now, what's your favorite Shimano spinning reel and your favorite Shimano bait casting reel?
Oh, man, that's tough. They make a lot of good reels, and I use a lot of each. Probably the Metanium MGL3. I've really grown to like that. Aaron Martins and I did a promotional video, and we got the first two that were on the water. I'm sure other people were playing with them in-house at Shimano, but as far as applying them in tournaments, it was me and Aaron, and it's just an incredible reel in your hand. I can't say enough about that reel. Ergonomically, it's so comfortable. It casts like a dream. It's got a great drag system. It comes in multiple retrieve ratios, and it handles a lot of line. It's got a good deep spool, so you can put a lot of line on it and use it for other techniques. As far as spinning, there's several. I like the Stella, the Sustain, the Twin Power, and the Stratic. All of those are in my arsenal, and I use them. Probably the Stratic I use a lot because it's good in fresh and salt water. But that's a tough question. There's a reel at every price point, and nowadays, as you well know, there's not much difference like there used to be. There used to be a dramatic difference from one style reel to the next, but now you can get digital reels, and like the Corrado has a digital option, and other reels in that category. They're spreading the technology out across the line. And it's good to see that people can get that stuff at a price point they can afford.
Amen.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very true. Because I know I lent a guy a couple of days ago a couple of rods for this weekend. He's up in the French River, He's in Kingston, and I when I left the gym, I dropped him off a couple of rods, and one of them was a DC on a Zodius, and he messaged me about, I don't know, just about a half an hour before we got on here, and all it said was, "I can't believe it. I haven't had a backlash yet."
Yeah.
You know, and there's a guy that's never used a bait caster.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal.
Don't try
the technology.
to kill it.
Yeah,
Don't
we
try to
truly
kill
do
it.
have an anti-backlash reel now. You got to really mess up to make it, bird's nest. I mean, it pretty much, if you got it adjusted correctly to the weight of your lure, the line you're using, and you can throw it into the wind, into a 6, 8, 10 knot wind and get away with it. You might get a loop or two override, but you're not going to get a bird's nest.
No.
And that speaks highly to the technology that Shimano has brought.
Hey, Scotty, we know a guy that got a bird's nest in a DC.
Ooh, I thought we weren't going to bring that up. I would.
You got to work to do it.
One cast, drilled it in the water about 6 feet from the boat.
Yeah.
Like hitting a brick wall.
And he looks at me and says, "I thought this wasn't supposed to get a bird's nest."
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't a cast.
Yeah, that's pilot error there.
The boat
was right in the back here. We were fishing.
Bernie, the boat wasn't big enough for me to hide. I tell you, I wanted to crawl into a hole when I saw that happen. But those were different days. A terminal tackle question. I got to ask both of you because I think both of you might have different answers. I'm not sure, but why use a flipping hook versus a Texas rig hook? Steve Shaw finds that the bait isn't sitting true in flipping hooks. His reference is a heavier wire Texas rig hook. Do you think the hookup ratio is better with a flipping hook in heavy mat or no?
Okay, well, I think what he's asking is a offset versus a J hook or a straight shank hook. There's two schools of thought there, and ask one pro, you're going to get one answer. Ask another, you get a different answer. I use EWG, extra wide gap offset hooks most of the time. They're forged. I like, there's a variety of brands that I use, everything from VMC to Gamakatsu. I know guys that like a snell knot on a straight shank hook for flipping. I'm not of that camp. I think I like a little more movement. When you do a snell knot, you've kind of made a very secure attachment to the shank of the hook, so there's no hinging effect with that knot. If you tie a traditional knot to the eye of the hook, you're going to have a little more movement, and I like movement. That's just me. I like the hooking percentage of a EWG, but there's a bunch of guys on the Elite Series, a bunch of guys on the Major League Fishing Tour that would argue that point, and some of them are better flippers than me. So I think it comes down to personal preference. If your hooking percentage is not good, then you probably need to address that and try something different. Jim, your take?
Well, I know when I fished in tournaments and stuff, I had one hook that we tied on our line, and it was an owner 3X strong 3/0 straight shank, and we'd have a bag of 4/0 too in case we used something a little bit bigger. But it was always a straight shank hook. But we used to use a toothpick to hold the plastic in place too, and we would never do that now. It's just something that
I use a toothpick. I still use one. I still use it.
Really, eh?
I'm an old guy.
I got away from doing that, eh? But I was going to say, I have a buddy now who all his flipping hooks, he puts a triple strong, very small split ring on it first, and then puts the sinker on against it with the rubber protector and that on it. So the split ring always allows some freedom to the plastic. And I asked him, I said, yeah, but you're fishing with 65-pound Power Pro. When you set the hook, are you breaking any of those split rings? Are they coming apart? Because it's just sheer impact. And he said, no, he's using little weenie ones that he got. I think they might be from owner too. I'm not sure, but they're very, very small, and they're almost 3 wraps of wire, and they're just super, super strong. He's never broke one. It's something I'm going to have to try next year. It's been in my mind. I forgot to do it this year because I didn't do as much fishing as I wanted to, and it's something I want to try. But it's just another. But no, I was a straight shank guy, but I'm out the back here. I started using those 2-degree VMCs, that are off by 2 degrees. I was down seeing Tom McMurray and the boys one day, and Chris Hockley and them, and they gave me a bag of stuff on the way out the door. Like they just wanted to get rid of me, so they gave me a bunch of stuff that went away.
Yeah. There's
But,
a lot of options with that. You can go a lot of directions with hooks and the gauge hook, the shape of the hook, the size of the hook. There's different schools of thought, and everybody's a little bit different, I think.
Well, I will say this. We've approached the hour, but I do have one question. And when I have any kind of guests on that have your vintage, and I say that with all due respect, there was a question asked here in the audience, and I would love to ask the question myself. Without electronics, because let's face it, you guys started without electronics or the ability to use electronics. If you're going to dissect the lake, where's the first place you're going to go, Bernie?
That's going to depend on the lake. Man, that's tough. If it's a natural lake, probably going to go where the water is entering the lake or leaving the lake first. And that might be true for a reservoir as well, but a point is a good place to start, whether it's a main lake point or a secondary point in a creek. And I'm going to look for stuff that's related to those structural features, whether it's a grass bed or docks or stumps, whatever. I'm going to look for something unique that will hold fish on those main lake features.
Right on. Jim, I almost know what your answer is going to be.
I like the incoming water too. I'm going to look at the map, and I'm going to take the half of the lake that has the most options to start. Like islands, points, creeks coming in. A lot of lakes, the natural lakes up here, they tend to have that one big deep basin, and then there'll be a small part with islands in a creek or two, and there'll be a big part with a whole bunch of islands. They just all seem to have that. And that's the way I would do it, because that great big giant open piece of water, there's no options there for the fish, unless you're looking for lake trout. And then I go, no. But it's if you're talking bass, I'm all about options. The more little things that there is in places for them to be, and food shelves, and then you just got to break it down from there.
It's such a tough question to answer. I mean, it's a seasonal thing. Different seasons will kind of dictate where you start. In early spring, you're going to look for protected water. In the summer, you're going to go more out towards the main lake or big creeks and get away from the backs of them. That's a tough question to answer.
No, it is. And but you guys have answered some great questions, offered up some great info, and we're going to leave you with some great advice from Bernie himself. But on behalf of CFN, Jim, thanks so much for bringing Bernie to us. And Bernie, thanks so much for your time, my friend.
Glad to be here. I'm welcome to call me anytime. I'd love to get back with you guys. It's been fun.
Right on. Well, here's some very, very sound advice offered up by Bernie himself for anybody who is a young angler looking to become a professional angler, perhaps a professional angler like both Jim and Bernie. I'm going to play that and leave that with you guys. In the meantime, have yourselves a great night. And, of course, we will see you Monday for CFN Live. Take care.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, guys.
My advice, if you really like what you're doing and you want to pursue this, stay on the water. I don't care if you're fishing from the bank. Fish as much as you can. Stay on the water. Experiment. Try new lures. And try to fish with people better than you. That's the quickest learning curve I can think of. I love the sport, and I love my profession. Don't get me wrong, but it is a job. It's extremely challenging. As far as a pivotal point, every day is a pivotal point. It's always a challenge, and I keep going. There's a fish. Oh, it's a good one, too. That's why you use Ray Marine.